Okay, so now that we are familiar with formulas and how to solve them and what they are, that they apply to real life situations, let's take a look at solving some word problems. All right, so I know this sheet initially looks a little intimidating because you just see a bunch of words, but hopefully we'll use what we've learned up to this point and we'll take away a little bit of the scariness factor, if you would. For starters, but when you guys do a word problem for me on a quiz and whatnot, the way you're going to get full credit for it is I need to see the following items. All right, when we're doing a word problem, there's a setup phase and there's a solution phase. Many students kind of start with the solution phase, but because they didn't do the setup phase, they can't do the word problem. All right, because what we solve are equations, not word problems actually, right? So the idea is from the words, from all this verbiage, we have to create an equation that I can eventually solve. And so this phase right here, the setup phase, is very important. What you do in the setup phase is you first label your unknowns. What are they asking you to find? Give it a name. Call it X, call it A, call it B. Make it a happy face, but come up with some symbol. Labeling the unknowns is important because as these word problems get harder, right, it impacts the second stage. What you need to do in the second stage is set up or create the same number of equations as unknowns. So if we have one unknown, I only need one equation. If we have two unknowns, I need two equations. If I have three unknowns, we'll need three. So that first step right there pretty much directs what happens in the next. All right, and we'll talk about how to set up those equations. Once you set up the equation, you basically substitute the information into it, and then at this point, we're back to some familiar territory where you can solve it. And then, last but not least, make sure you get your units right. You know, when you have your answer, is it in feet? Is it feet squared? Is it dollars? All right, is it a percentage rate? So make sure you use that. So please do that. If you do not do that, you will not get full credit on word problems that you'll see in your quizzes. So please make sure you're following my game plan, my flow. So let's practice this. So the first word problem I've got, it says the radius of a circular pit is 4 feet. Find the area of the pit. All right, and so looking at my setup, the first thing I need to do is figure out, well, what is unknown? What am I being asked to find? And that's pretty much in this last sentence. They're asking me to find the area. So how about we just label that as A? So A is equal to the area. So you just earned 1 point by just telling me what you're looking for. Don't tell me that, you don't get the point. The next thing we need to do is set up the same number of equations as unknowns. So I only have one unknown, so there's only one equation. And this is where our formulas kick in. We're talking about a circular pit, and we're talking about its area. So we're going to pull out, right, our famous formula for the area of a circle. A equals pi r squared. So you just did the second part, right? You created the same number of equations as unknowns. Now we're ready to start solving. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to substitute information into the equation I have. So when we read this carefully, we're told that the radius is 4 feet. So that's basically telling us that r is 4. So I'll take my formula and I'll plug 4 in for the radius. Order of operations, say before we do this multiplication, I got to do that that exponent. So 4 squared is 16. I'm going to write that as 16 pi for a moment. I realize you guys have calculators and all that. Pi is famously known as 3.14, so you could use that as an estimate. But it's okay to leave your answer this way. This is what we call an exact answer, and exact answers are nice. So just leave it alone. You know, I don't have to check your calculator skills by multiplying it. And then the only thing that's left is our units, right? What are we talking about here? Well, since I'm talking about area and we're measured in feet, then this would be feet squared. So again, you can see all 5 points of my game plan, right? You're labeling your unknown. You're creating the same number of equations. In this case, we just had to use a formula. You're taking known information and substituting it in. You're solving for the unknown, right? So A is equal to 16 pi, and then I'm getting my units right. All 5 items have to be clearly shown in your work to get full credit for a word problem. So let's keep practicing it. Number 2. So what happens in number 2 is I'm talking about the perimeter of a basketball court is 268 feet. we're told that the width is 28 feet, and we're asked to find the length. All right, so again, a lot of verbiage there. What's the unknown? Well, again, they're telling me what to do. All right, so since we're asking for the length, how about we call it L? All right, so L is the length. So how many formulas do we need? How many equations? We only need one. And we're talking about the perimeter of the basketball court, right? Most basketball courts that I know of are rectangles. So perimeter is twice the length plus twice the width. So you've just done pretty much the setup. You identified your unknown, right? And you're creating one equation by just invoking a formula that's needed in this case. And now what we're going to do is get ready to substitute info. So what do we know? Well, we know that the perimeter, right, of this basketball court is 268. So they're basically telling us that P is 268. And then later they're telling us that the width is 28 feet. So they just told us what W is. So basically I substitute these known values into my formula. So I'm going to replace the P with 268. Oops, that's an equal sign. We have 2L, and then we're going to replace the W with 28. And now that we've made that substitution, we're back to something very similar to 2.1 and 2.2, where we try to just solve for the remaining variable, L. So we're going to do that. So I'll start by simplifying. 28 times 2, I believe, is 56. To solve for L, my next move would probably be to subtract 56 from both sides. That would give us 2L. And then I think what we get there is 212. Right? Let me check my 2, yeah. And then to get L by itself, I'll divide both sides by 2. And so we basically get L, let me do a little bit of long division here, 2, 1, and then 0, 2, 6, 106. All right, so L is 106. So we've labeled our unknowns. We found the equation, right? We created one equation we needed. We substituted values, I solved for the unknown, and then last but not least, what are my units? Well, we're measuring a length. Everything is measured in feet. So our final answer is 106 feet. So again, please show me all those steps so you'll get full credit. Next one, we got to find the height of a triangle whose area is 45 square feet and whose base is 18 feet. So again, what's the unknown? Well, reading the problem carefully, they're telling me to find the height. So how about we call it H? All right, so H is the height. We're talking about a triangle. We're talking about its area. So what formula do I need to create? Well, how about we pull out of our toolbox the famous formula A equals 1/2 B times H. So we're done with our setup. I labeled how many unknowns I had, created the same number of equations. Now we're ready to substitute info. So let's read carefully. They're telling us the area is 45. So A is 45, and the base is 18. So B is 18. So I take this information and I substitute it into my equation. So I get 45 equals 1/2 the base times, the base is 18, and then times the height. All right, and then 1/2 of 18 is 9. And to divide, basically to solve for H, I'll divide both sides by 9, and we get H is 5. 5 what? Well, we're measuring a height, so this would be feet. So again, you kind of see my word problem rhythm, right? Identify your unknown, pull out a handy-dandy formula, substitute the information in, solve what's left. Okay? Need to see all those to get full credit. Last but not least, our last word problem. How long would a person need to invest $3,000 in an account that earned 3% simple interest in order to get $540 in interest? Whew. All right, so very lengthy problem. So let's try to find our unknown. All right, and so they're asking us how long. All right, so to me, that's a time. So the unknown in this is how much time it's going to take. So there's my unknown. How many formulas do we need? How many equations? We only need one. And since we're talking about simple interest and money and rates, our famous formula is I equals PRT. What do we know? Well, again, there's your setup phase. What do we know? Well, we know the amount I invested is 3,000. So P is 3,000. The rate is given, right? So R is 3%. And the interest rate, we actually know what I is. I is 540. So if I substitute all this information in the equation, we get 540 equals the principal, which is 3,000, times the rate. Now we got to be careful here. I'm kind of jumping the gun into 2.4, but when you do a calculation with a percent, we don't use the percent symbol. We use a decimal or we use a fraction. And I'll go ahead and I'll use the decimal. So 3% is 0.3 or 0.03. Again, if you don't understand what I did there, hold on. We'll talk more about this in section 2.4. And then, of course, we don't know what the time is, so there's my t. So essentially what we are left with after following our steps is we're left with basically solving for t. I'll begin by simplifying. So maybe we bust out a calculator or do a calculation, right? 0, 0, 0, and 9, a couple of zeros. So we're talking about 90t. How do I get t by itself? I'll divide both sides by 90, right? 0 divides out, 9 into 54 goes in 6. So t equals 6 what? Well, as I shared with you guys earlier, time is always measured in years. So when we're using this formula. So we're talking about t equaling to 6 years. All right, so there's how we solve some word problems. Dare I say these are simple word problems. I know you probably want to slap me through the video for that, but they're simple because there's a known formula that we just break out, substitute things in, and go. Our word problems will get harder, so this ability to label the unknowns, setting up equations, substituting values, using our skills to solve, and then units is going to be huge. That's going to make you a really good word problem solving person if you can get used to doing those 5 steps. All right, that wraps up section 2.3. As noticed, we're going to talk about percents. We're now ready to talk about them. See you guys in the next section.